Welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. Well, it's my kind of story time. This is from a book that I wrote when I first came over to the Philippines called 7 Days, and I've already read a few of those books. This one is not really so much from the Philippines. This is from from my days in the north of England, and it's very much in line with the kind of northern humour, if you like. It's I've got to warn you, it's quite dark humour. When I was a kid, nobody ever called me Terry. My brother would call me our Terry, and I would call him, for some strange reason, I would call him our Nev. Oi, our Nev. And my sister I called our Patty, and my mother would say to me, "Go and get our Patty, your sister." And so the phrase kind of stuck, and as has happened so many times, when you're writing, sometimes just a simple phrase will set you off on a whole thing, a whole story which unfolds as if it has a life of its own. And of course, eventually as you work on it, it does have a life of its own. Well, this one is called Hands Off Our Mavis. And I guess you'd have to say it's about a pub brawl and a very, very tough mother. This is not about my mother, by the way. Hands off our Mavis. So I still say things were going great till pretty boy Eddie waltzed in the door of the Pig and Whistle with that fancy piece of his and started straight in on our Mavis. Now we all know our Mavis is no great beauty. Okay, not even that attractive. Fine. So she struggles even to be plain. Happy now? Does that give Eddie the right to do as he pleases with her? I don't think so, sweetheart. And you know what? I don't know where he got that name from anyway. 'Cause when you take into account that pretty boy Eddie ain't no prettier than you and me, you can see that him strutting round doing his Gary Cooper lacks a certain credibility. So what if he's seen High Noon 37 times? I've seen Dirty Harry 43 times. Do I keep asking you to make my day, punk? Well, I wasn't about to just stand there watching him trying to undress my sister as if I wasn't even in the room, as if my head's buttoned up the back. Want to know how to take a man down in one? Listen and learn, honey. A well-placed kidney punch is as good as any. Now it's best delivered from behind, which some would say is sneaky, but hey, this is not Hollywood and I'm not Rocky Balboa. Life ain't sweet, life ain't fair, sweetheart. So that's how the pretty boy got his. This placed him on his knees and perfectly positioned for my Doc Martens special edition Chelsea boot, placed with surgical precision right to his family jewels. Now I'm not a man who is easily surprised. So as for what happened next, well, you could have knocked me down, which coincidentally is exactly what pretty boy Eddie's fancy piece up and did, and with a beer crate at that. Now I ask you, was that fair? We were fighting out man to man. Okay, I admit that I had that small advantage and maybe should have waited till Eddie was looking before I hit him from behind. However, you could say that was instant calmer as he was doing his thing and fastened onto our Mavis's face at the time. And you know what? Now I think of it, she didn't seem to be objecting an awful lot. So it turns out that the fancy piece was handier with a beer crate than any bartender I ever knew, and more forgiving in some ways, because she helped me to my feet before she threw that positively vicious left hook. Fortunately for me, she missed the mark and wrapped her arm around my neck. So she ended up close and my head got buried for a moment in her chest. Now, I'm a leg man myself, but even in the heat of the moment, I clearly remember thinking, boy, is this girl built? This is probably the exact moment that her knee came hurtling up sharp and fast, and cruelly so, and arrived at the tender pelvic junction between my legs. Now, isn't pain a funny thing? Well, okay, not a laugh out loud funny thing, but it does have its way of making you focus in the moment. As that Buddha fella and his gang of bedsheet warriors would say, and certainly the fancy piece now had all my attention. You know how things look when the room is spinning around and you're swimming in a sea of pain? Well, okay, you probably don't, sweetheart, so just use your imagination. Here's where my acute sense of irony, which I have been complimented on many times. I peered through the veil of agony, and if I had been physically able to do so, I would have gasped in amazement at what I saw. Pretty boy Eddie and me are both enjoying the same crippling injury, but I lie alone and ignored, while Eddie has the undivided attention of both the fancy piece and, yes, you've got it, our sunshine. Yes, you've got it, sorry, sunshine, our bloody Mavis, for crying out loud. Pretty boy is lying curled up like a big prawn in the fetal position, clutching his jennies, which are still on fire if his are anything like mine, and sounds like he is positively crooning about the pain like Bing frigging Crosby. The two women are singing out their sympathy in two-part harmony, is how it seemed to me. Now help me out here, will you? Did I miss something? I mean, just take a look at what happened. Now, pretty boy Eddie crashed our party with the fancy piece in tow and did no more than immediately make for our Mavis for a cheap grope. And Fancy didn't seem to mind one bit, don't you know. In the sharpest of contrast, my mother, who at the time was winning an arm wrestling match against Benny the Bull, took on an expression of extreme displeasure that was about as subtle as a Sherman tank. Be informed, sweetheart. You don't want to make my mummy mad. You won't like my mummy when she is mad. Bearing that in mind, and only in the spirit of keeping the peace, I sidled over to Eddie and Mavis and slipped Eddie the kidney punch and then the nutcracker, after which I stepped back to savour a quick victory. Enter the fancy piece, and vengeance was hers, and Lord was it ever. When I eventually hit the floor, I was clutching my nether regions and wondering how much was left of my bits and pieces. tables, chairs and people scattered as my mother, who was already in a mood due to breaking in a new pair of G.I. Joe's steel-capped work boots, cut a path through the room as she stomped her way over to me with her face as black as Harry Belafonte. Never one to mince words, she grated through furiously clenched teeth as she sneered down at me. "You little wimp! You let the fancy piece take you down, for Christ's sake!" Then she dropped a coin in the Duke, and as the king warbled his way through Love Me Tender, she walked in perfect time to the music, slowly and almost sensuously, I thought, for an old girl, to where the fancy piece was still honeying over Eddie. On the way over, Mommy casually rolled up her sleeve over a well-muscled forearm and picked up the discarded beer crate. Oh man, let me tell you, at the end of the most beautifully executed right-hand swing, Fancy Piece flew into orbit without ever knowing what hit her. Darth Vader himself never looked so menacing as my mother must have looked as she towered over the paralysed form of Eddie, who was by now speechless and cringing in terror of anticipation. He stared up in panic-stricken at my mother, with eyes bulging through the fingers of hands curled like claws over his face, and probably praying for a quick and painless death. Mommy stooped down and fixed a vice-like grip round pretty boy Eddie's throat, and as she pulled his face close to hers, she smiled, almost kindly, but her eyes glittered as they narrowed right down to two thin slits. Her fist, which is a whole lot bigger than most guys I know, must have entirely filled his field of vision, pressed as it was hard against his nose. Through teeth hung with ice, and a voice that dripped with malice, she hissed, "Hands off our Mavis." That is from a book. Wait a moment while I talk myself down. That's from a book called 7 Days, and it's mostly about stories that were inspired by time in the Philippines when I first came out here. You can buy that book on Kindle, and Kindle, as you may know, is one where you look at and read the book on your computer, your laptop or your phone, tablet, whatever, and it's not expensive. It's not expensive at all as far as Kindle goes, because you can download the app for it for free. I hope you enjoy it. Do come back on the channel and tell me what you thought. Watch out for Mommy. This is a foreigner in the Philippines. Bye for now.